Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots. So in this video, I'm going to be building another routed MDF track, but this time it's for a subscriber. Now the whole point of this video is to show you guys exactly how I build this particular track. Now there are thousands of different ways to do it, and I could do it 1,000 different ways, but this particular video I'm going to be doing it from 6mm routed MDF with a slot all the way through the board, reinforcing underneath, and then the groove will go down 9mm through the reinforcing. So you actually have a 3mm wide groove and you can actually go down 9mm so you can run full wood guides. So the idea is to talk you through this whole video, so if you fancy to go at doing it yourself, you'd know how at least I did this one. And then obviously there's variations on a theme which you could diversify from and then create your own track. But this is all about making a track from scratch for my subscriber and showing you guys exactly how I do it. Now, you might be asking yourself, would I make you a track? And the answer is probably yes, I probably would make you a track. So the next question is, how much would I charge? Well, the question you should ask yourself on that is, how much would you like to be paid per day? And that's probably, unless you're Elon Musk, probably roughly what I would want to be paid as well. And this particular track has taken me 4 whole days to make over the course of about a week and a half. So that gives you some idea of roughly what I might charge. And yes, I would indeed make you a track. But the purpose of this video is to show you how I did this one. So if you want to make one yourself, you can. So I'm going to narrate my way all the way through this video, and hopefully at the end of it you'll have some idea of how I built this track and how you could build your own if you're interested. So let's get on with it. Let's get this track built. Okay, so what I'm doing here is simply marking out my sheet of 6mm MDF. I'm cutting it out with a handsaw because I think most people have got a handsaw. Could do it with a power saw, but a handsaw is a little bit more accurate. And what I'm doing is I'm cutting it just a slight bit shy of the line. I'm giving myself about 4mm of extra wood. That will become apparent as to why I'm doing that in a moment. So here I am just chopping up some 3x1 wood, so it's planed and square edged wood, so it's all nice and smooth, it's not all rough, so it won't give you splinters when you're handling the board. It's not much more expensive than ordinary sawn wood, but it's a much nicer job. And I'm using 3 inches by 1 inches because it gives you a really strong frame. And then in between the main frame I'm going to be using 2 inch by 1 inch wood, again planed and square edged, so nice and smooth to the hand. And here I'm just marking out my crossbars so that I know exactly where to put my pilot drill holes. And here I'm using a 5mm drill and just putting in the pilot holes ready for screwing the frame together. And here I'm just countersinking all the holes to make them nice, so when you put the screws in they're nice and flush. And here obviously I'm just simply screwing it all together with some 2-inch screws and a little bit of wood glue. So now I'm just putting a bead of PVA over the edge of the frame and then putting the 6mm MDF on top, and I'm pinning it down with some panel pins just to keep it all in place and keep it down for the time being. Now I'm actually putting the boards on to the frame using the original 2 cut lines from the shop, and I'm actually leaving my saw lines overhanging the wood itself because later on I'll be trimming that excess off to make sure that the board is exactly to the right size. So here all I'm doing is cutting up some blocks to go into the corners of the frame to give it lots of strength. And all this is a little bit of 3 inch by 2 inch softwood. And here I'm just knocking off the bottom corner because that's the corner that will be felt when you put your hand underneath the track, because the top side will be tight against the board and won't be felt or anything. And here I'm just pre-drilling the holes, countersinking them as well, lots of glue on the block, and then get it all screwed in there nice and tight. So the screw's really only there just to let the glue dry. Once it's all nice and dry, it'll be really strong, and then make that corner super strong, so when you're handling the board or transporting it or moving it around, you're not going to split the joint and it's not going to go all funny on you. So here, as I alluded to earlier on in the video now, I'm actually trimming off that extra 3 or 4mm that I left on that main board, just so that the boards are absolutely flush to the actual frame that I've just screwed in or glued them to. And now I'm just running down the outside of the two other sides of the board that came cut from the shop, just to make sure that they're perfect, hence the reason why there's not as much sawdust coming off of those. There's just a quick flick down the edge just to make sure that they're perfectly sized to the frame. So this part of the job isn't necessarily needed, I'm just doing it to save wood. So I'm actually half lapping my 3x1 because I don't quite have enough wood in my little offcuts to do the whole stretch across the bottom of the board. So I'm actually using up all the offcuts by half lapping the boards so that I can actually continue on using a whole length without having to buy a whole new length of wood. So this is just an economy measure here, but you could just buy a fresh piece of wood if you didn't mind having lots of offcuts. But I wasn't looking for offcuts, I just wanted to get the job done using the wood that I'd bought, because there was technically enough wood to do the job. So this is unnecessary, but I'm doing it in my case. So what I'm doing here is plenty of glue, a clamp in the middle of the joint, and 3 screws, just hold it all nice and secure. 3 screws is much better than 2 because it triangulates the screw pattern, so it makes it really strong. Just bang these screws in, and I can cut the excess off and then cut it to the right size in the board and then screw it into the board at a later date. And here I'm just cutting off the excess screws because, again, rather than buying some screws that I haven't actually got, I use the screws that I have got, put them all the way through the wood, grind off the backs to make them nice and flush, and there you go. And the trouble is with using screws that are exactly the right length is the end of the screw is tapered, so really you lose about 5mm of thread because the thread disappears to nothing at the tip of the screw. So driving the screw all the way through thin wood actually gives you 100% thread all the way through the wood, because otherwise if you just left the tip on the end, you might find that you get a little bit of a shortfall in your screw depth. So going all the way through and out the other side is a much stronger job. And then here what I'm doing is laying out my 2x1, getting them nice and evenly spaced, drawing on the board where they actually lace, ready for the glue. And again, here's the 3x1 cross members going in, exactly the same thing, just marking out where I'm going to half lap the joints, and I cut some simple half lap joints and I can screw and glue the whole thing together. So here we are, just cutting out the half lap joints with my saw because it's quicker, but you could just as easily do it with an ordinary panel saw and a chisel and just bang out those little notches in there that you can see. And here we are, just marking out the boards as well, ready for the glue and the screws. And now I'm putting in all the pilot holes around the outside of the board, 5mm hole with a countersink so that I can screw the cross members in when I'm ready. And here I'm just laying down the glue on the marks that I've already put down on the board, so that when I drop all my boards in here, I know exactly where I've got to put the wood and I know where the glue's got to go. And here we are, just popping in the screws, clamp on the top just to make sure the 3x1 is all the way down tight to the board, and then just popping in those screws to hold it all together. So what I'm doing here is I'm just marking out where those cross members underneath are on top, so I've got a line to follow when I put in my screws on the intersect points and then my pins everywhere else. And here are the screws for the intersect points. They're about 2 inches long, and just driving them straight down into the wood, and then everywhere else gets a panel pin for now, just to make sure that everything's all nice and tight and the glue is nicely in the joint and everything is pulled down tight. And here I'm going round, drilling in some spaced holes so that I can actually run in a couple of 1-inch screws just to give it some mechanical strength. The glue is pretty damn strong and the panel pins are good as well, but I like to put a screw in just for a little bit of extra security, because you never know, if the glue ever lets go or a pin lets go or whatever over time, then the board can start wavering around and all the rest of it, but screws will stop that. Now just flicking over the outside edges just to knock off all the sharp edges so that you don't get a splinter when you're handling it occasionally. And now I'm just running around countersinking all those nails that I've put into the board, because the next job is some filler, or Bondo as the Americans call it. So it's just ordinary automotive car body filler. I'm just going around whacking it into all the holes, making sure it's proud of the surface so that I don't have to fill it twice. And then I'm going to go around and sand it with the pad sander. Now I like to sand it with the pad sander first because it gets the vast majority of the material gone, and then I'll finish off over the top with a hand sander just because it gives me a little bit more control and I can actually feel what I'm doing as I'm going. So now I'm just using 3 coats of ordinary water-based white primer. Nothing special here. There will be 3 coats going on, and then there'll be a sand down in between each coat. I'll leave it for a day to dry off, and then I'm good to go for the next stage. So this is a bit of a specialist part here. I'm actually using what they call a biscuit jointer. All it is a glorified angle grinder, and it cuts in an elliptical hole, and all I got there is beech wood that's pressed and dried into an elliptical shape, and it makes a very, very good tongue and groove joint effectively. But in this particular case, the biscuit gets glued into the wood, tapped in on one side only. And then what I do for this particular job is I sand the bit of biscuit joint that's sticking out on the edge of the board with a bit of sandpaper to thin it down a little bit, and then I cover it in wax from a candle, just grind the wax into the wood, and that means then that this joint can then become undoable in a later scenario. So one side is glued in permanently and the other side is removable if needed, and I find that makes a really good joint, and it makes the joint perfectly level. It's basically just a glorified tongue and groove joint, nothing really more than that. So you could just use a tongue and groove joint. And here I'm just running in my 8mm holes ready for the bolts to hold the two boards together, and then we're ready for the marking out. Sorry for the fuzzy cam here. So this is just a homemade compass that I've made out of 2 bits of wood and a bolt at the top with a wing nut, a pencil glued into one end, and a screw screwed into the other end into a nice sharp point. Really is that simple. You can make a massive one. It costs you absolutely nothing. For a couple of scrap bits of wood, you can make yourself a huge compass, and you can do all this marking out no problem at all. So there's nothing really technical in this marking out. It's just me having a go. I got an idea of the track that I want in my mind. It's fairly clear. I've already worked out how wide the track wants to be, and the little runoff areas and chevrons and the track edge liner and everything else. So for your information, the track width is 110mm. The edges of the track that are defined in white to be 6mm, and then the inner chevrons is 12mm, and the outer chevrons where your back wheels would slide if you go wide of the corner is 30mm. This is a single lane racetrack, so only one groove in there. It's basically a rally track on a tarmac track, very, very similar to Crow Valley. So there's nothing really special going on here. You've seen me make Rickard Valley, which is a twin track, although it is technically still a rally track because it is only one track because there's a crossover in it. But this track is very, very similar to Rickard Valley, very, very similar to Crow Valley. So I'm going to leave this particular part of the video in because it was a bit of a failed attempt. Now this is a wobbly edge that I've made, and I'm using it to draw in a racing line because my subscriber wants a racing line track, not a groove slap bang in the middle of the track. So that requires a slightly different approach. Now my idea here was to mark out the racing line with this wobbly edge, and then I have a circle of the same footprint as my router with a hole in the middle of it. And the idea was to put this circle on the pencil line that you see me marking out now, and then set that wobbly edge back up against the edge of the round of the disc, so that basically when I clamp this wobbly edge down using those bars you can see, I can then run the router along that and it will cut the line that I've marked with a pencil. But it didn't work. The wobbly edge was too soft, so as I applied pressure to the router to follow the guide, the guide was just moving. It was just flexing around, and it wasn't actually cutting the line that I wanted. So like I said, I gave up on my wobbly edge, and I've reverted to having to strike the arc of the router using my standard radius arm marked out with my compass, my massive compass. It's a little bit more tricky to get the lines to all flow nicely given the parameters of the actual marked out track rather than using the wobbly edge, because the wobbly edge you do it by hand. This way you've got to be a bit more precise. You've got to kind of work out exactly where that radius is to get just the right look that you're after for the racing line. But it's just a little bit more difficult to do, but it can be done. And then the straight edges are simply done with a straight edge, not very difficult with that at all. The only thing with marking out a racing line with a radius edge is that you've just got to be a little bit more careful when you line up your router to make sure that one groove flows perfectly onto the next. So this part of the video is a little bit pointless really, because it's highly specific to this particular track, but my subscriber really likes the under and overpass on Crow Valley, and I offered that option to him and he said yes, he would definitely like that to be done. So that's what I'm doing here. I've pre-marked out where my under and overpass is, and I'm just using my pad saw to break through the MDF, and then I'm going around with a jigsaw. Thank you, Ray, for lending me your jigsaw. Just going around chopping out all the parts that involve making the bridge. So here I'm cutting up lots and lots of softwood because as I've used 6mm MDF, I've now got to join those two halves of the board together because I've gone all the way through the board, and I also need to allow for the 9mm groove. So that means I've got to cut up a whole load of 1-inch square softwood and then cut a little tiny notch in it about 6mm wide by about 4mm deep, so the guide has got somewhere to go within the groove. And once all these parts are cut, then they just need gluing into place, and as usual I'm going to use my tried and tested method of holding everything down with old bricks. Why? Because it works. So the spacings of these pieces of wood are approximately 4 inches wide, and they don't have to be particularly accurate, they just need to be in the right place so that they don't interfere with the actual cut groove, and you've got a little bit of allowance on either side for the little notches, so everything's got good clearance. And here you can see exactly what it looks like underneath when all the little reinforcers are done. Now, I did actually change these short pieces in the end. I didn't really like the way that they were looking. I didn't like the feel of them. I didn't think that they were going to be holding up to the tension of this board as it's being bent to give the clearance for the underpass. So I ended up changing them for some slightly longer pieces of wood. You'll see that later on in a second now. And here I'm just putting in the uprights inside that. This is actually giving me my exact clearance. And I'm going to be putting in some little blocks here just to reinforce the inside as well. Lots of glue, lots of clamps, keep it all clamped down, and it all works out in the end. And here I'm just putting in some Bondo or car body filler again, just to smooth out that joint and make that underpass super smooth and super flowing. So here I'm just putting in some reinforcers to make sure that the underpass is well supported, because obviously these bits of wood are a little bit floppy at the moment, and each piece of wood that goes in now makes it that much stronger. And you can see the lower part of the track is notched, and the upper part now I'm just fitting in some extra pieces just to bridge that gap. Plenty of glue, plenty of clamps, and it all gets reinforced really, really nicely. And then we're adding in more of those little blocks to hold the track nice and level. Again, more bricks, more weight, more glue. And then we come to fit the bridge sides, which is just a case of cutting out the MDF and then putting lots of glue on again, and then obviously lots of clamps, and let it dry. So pretty much the last job on this build, really, as far as I'm taking it at least, is to put in this last piece of ground. Doesn't have to be particularly accurate. It's got to be chopped around afterwards anyway, but by the subscriber, and also mounded up with a bit of filler, I suspect, so we can have a nice sort of grassy knoll, if you like, so that your cars have got something interesting to drive around. There might even be some sort of little tree on there or something. Who knows what's going to end up with this piece of board, but it'll all be covered up with ground effects, so no big deal. And this is the basic wiring diagram that I should be following. And this is the track plan that I was following. Now, this is one of the drawings that I sent to my subscriber. I sent about 10 options, but this is the one he chose. And he said that he wanted the Crow Valley under an overpass in it. So I put that at the top, and you can see I've made the amendments in the red on there. And he said he wanted some S-bends in it, a little bit like Home Racing World's track. Well, the trouble is with Home Racing World's track is it's very long. I think it's about 16 feet long. Whereas this track isn't really even 8 feet long, and the little bit of track that you can see at the bottom there isn't long enough to get any sensible wibbly wobblies in there, and there's plenty of wibbly wobblies around the track, so I put him in a really nice hard chicane, so that gives him something to slow down for. I thought that might be a little bit more interesting than trying to squeeze in some more wibbly wobblies that he's got everywhere else, so that's why that went in there, so that's why there's an amendment. And here we can see the whole board finished as far as I'm taking it. So it's all in white primer, all the track is marked out, all the line is routed out, all supported, joints are in. Some of the wiring is in at this point, so not all of the wiring, but some of it. And you can see the bridge is all in there, the underpass, and we got the nice gradient running from the lower part to the upper part of the underpass and overpass there. So here we have the control panel. On the right hand side is the input. On the left hand side is a 3.5mm stereo jack plug for a Polycar hand controller. And the center switch is simply direction, and it's mounted on a piece of polished stainless steel, believe it or not, but it was a bit foggy outside when I took this video, so it's gone a bit misty. And here we can see the overview of the track marked out and the basic line, and you can see that the routed line is pretty much following what would be a racing line, and the line isn't staying static to the middle of the track. There's a flying ant coming up in a second, and it wouldn't get off my board, so it wanted to be part of the video, so there it is, just there, gone by, and you'll see it again now as we come around. It's not a blemish in the wood, it's an ant that wouldn't go away. So here's an overview of the underside of both of the boards, and you can see all the reinforcing in place, keeping the track nice and secure, and part of the electrics. And some nice pretty overview shots of the track, and some pictures of the underside. So the way that I've decided to power the copper tape on this particular track build is via these 3/8 holes. So you run the copper tape off the edge of the board and into the 3/8 hole, and in the middle of the 3/8 hole you can see the power wire coming up. So the copper tape goes down, and then the power wire goes over the top of the copper tape. Then you drop the washer into the hole, and then you put the screw into the middle, and the screw pulls the copper wire down onto the copper tape and makes the connection, or the copper tape and the copper wire touch the washer, and the washer carries the power from the power line to the copper tape, either way. And the way that I get the power from one board to the next is via another piece of wire actually being clamped onto the baseboard bolts, and the bolt itself becomes a positive or negative terminal. There are 2 bolts that hold the whole thing together, so one is positive and one is negative, and that's how the power gets from one side of the board to the other. And obviously then you can pick up the power from the fly cable that's being clamped via the bolt, and then run it through all of your end points of your copper tape on the opposing board. And there we are, that's another track out there in slot car land, and I hope that my subscriber enjoys it for years to come. And I hope that you've learned something through this video. If you had an idea about building your own track and you weren't quite sure, hopefully this video has at least given you some pointers and ideas of how to do it. And like I said at the beginning of the video, if you'd like me to make you a track, that's something that I could entertain. So my details are down below. Just contact me through my website, Swift16, and we'll have a chat and we'll see where it goes. But please only contact me if you are actually serious, because it takes me time to answer emails, and I don't want to get bogged down in conversations that aren't really going anywhere. I hope you understand. So anyway, if you've enjoyed this content, maybe you'll subscribe, and if you could hit the little bell button, that would be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.